Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when you're home alone, convinced that someone or something is watching you? Our story begins with a young man who learns the hard way that sometimes those fears are all too real. The whisper in the rafters. The floorboards creaked ominously under Thomas's feet as he ascended the narrow staircase to the attic. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a desperate plea to turn back. But he couldn't. Not now. Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. It had started 3 weeks ago, just days after Thomas had moved into the old Victorian house he'd inherited from his eccentric great-aunt. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper, so faint he thought he'd imagined it. A soft, sibilant sound that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Thomas. He'd dismissed it as the settling of an old house, the groan of ancient timber adjusting to the changing seasons. But as the days wore on, the whispers grew more insistent, more frequent, and they always seemed to come from above. The attic. Thomas had avoided it at first, telling himself he was being ridiculous. Ghosts weren't real. The stress of starting a new job, of moving to a new town where he knew no one. That was all this was, his mind playing tricks on him. But then came the scratching. It started on the 7th night, just as Thomas was drifting off to sleep. A slow, methodical, scraping sound from directly overhead, as if something with long, sharp claws was dragging itself across the attic floor. Thomas had bolted upright, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He'd grabbed his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room as he searched for any sign of an intruder. But the house was silent, save for the pounding of his own heart. The next morning, he'd convinced himself it had been a dream, a particularly vivid nightmare brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But deep down he knew the truth. Something was up there, waiting. As the days passed, Thomas found himself jumping at every creak and groan of the house. He avoided the 2nd floor entirely, sleeping on the couch in the living room. But even there, he couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. More than once he caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, a dark shape darting just out of sight. When he turned to look, there was never anything there, but the chill that ran down his spine told him what his eyes couldn't see. He wasn't alone in this house. It was on the 21st night that Thomas finally snapped. The whispers had grown to a fever pitch, a constant susurration that filled his head even when he clapped his hands over his ears. The scratching had evolved into a thunderous pounding, as if something massive was hurling itself against the attic floor, desperate to break through. Thomas knew he couldn't go on like this. He had to face whatever was up there, or it would drive him mad. And so, here he was, climbing the stairs to the attic, armed with nothing but a flashlight and his own trembling courage. The door at the top of the stairs was old, its paint peeling in long strips that resembled claw marks. Thomas's hand shook as he reached for the tarnished brass knob. It was ice cold to the touch, sending a jolt through his body. For a moment, he hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this house and never look back. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that it was too late for that. Whatever was up here, it wouldn't let him leave. Not now, not ever. With a deep breath, Thomas turned the knob and pushed the door open. The attic beyond was pitch black, the beam of his flashlight seeming to be swallowed by the darkness. Dust motes swirled in the air, catching the light like tiny ghostly dancers. Thomas stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying the musty scent of age and decay. "Hello?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. Is anyone there?" Silence was his only answer. But as Thomas swept his flashlight around the room, he caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a stack of mouldering boxes, was a rocking chair, and it was moving. Slowly, rhythmically, the chair rocked back and forth. There was no breeze, no draft that could account for its motion. As Thomas watched, frozen in terror, he saw an indentation appear in the seat of the chair, as if something, had just sat down. "Thomas." The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't in his head. It filled the attic, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." The flashlight flickered, its beam growing weaker. Thomas tried to turn, to run, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The darkness pressed in around him, alive and hungry. From the shadows, he heard the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. Something was moving towards him, its breath, a wet, ragged wheeze. The flashlight gave one final, desperate flicker, illuminating a face mere inches from his own. A face that was all too familiar, yet horribly, monstrously wrong. It was his own face, aged and decayed, its eyes milky white and its mouth stretched in a rictus grin. As Thomas opened his mouth to scream, rotting hands reached for him, pulling him into an embrace as cold as the grave. The flashlight went out, plunging the attic into total darkness. But the silence was soon shattered by a scream that was abruptly cut short. When the neighbours finally called the police 3 days later, reporting a foul smell coming from the old Victorian house, they found no trace of Thomas. The attic was empty, save for a thick layer of dust and a single rocking chair. A rocking chair that, even as the police watched, began to slowly, rhythmically move. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. And remember, the next time you hear a strange noise in your attic, it might not be just your imagination. Sweet dreams, and don't let the ghosts bite.